A wealthy passerby noticed a beggar huddled on the sidewalk, accompanied by two skinny dogs. In a jaw-dropping moment, the millionaire recognized one of the dogs, and his reaction changed everything. On a chilly afternoon in the heart of the city, a millionaire named Marcus stepped out of his sleek car, distracted by the usual rush of business calls and emails. He hurried along the sidewalk, barely glancing at the homeless figures wrapped in blankets against the cold wind. Then something caught his eye. A man slumped near an alleyway, looking frail and lost but flanked by two dogs. Something about the dog's desperate posture tugged at Marcus's attention. He slowed his brisk pace, eyes narrowing. One dog, a patchy mutt with soulful brown eyes, stared at Marcus with a strange familiarity. At first, Marcus dismissed the thought. All stray dogs look alike, right? But as he passed, the dog inched forward, tail wagging in a tentative greeting. Alarmed by his own surge of recognition, Marcus turned back. Could this battered creature truly be from his distant past? Curiosity triumphed over caution, and Marcus approached the beggar. He noticed how the man gently stroked both dogs, shielding them from the wind. The second dog was younger, trembling with cold, while the older one gazed at Marcus with an unspoken plea. A swirl of memory churned in his mind, a memory of a dog lost under haunting circumstances. Kneeling in his tailored suit, Marcus carefully inspected the older dog's face, noticing a faded scar near its ear. A jolt of realization hammered his heart. It's really him. Stunned, Marcus locked eyes with the beggar, who shrank back, unsure of this well-dressed stranger's intentions. Marcus managed to steady his voice, asking how the man came upon the dog. The beggar's hesitant answer revealed a tragic chain of events that ended in these two dogs becoming his sole companions. In an instant, Marcus felt his world tilt. He'd spent years building wealth, burying regrets, and here was living proof of a past he tried to forget, now tethered to a homeless man on the brink. What happened next would send shockwaves through them both. An encounter bridging privilege and desperation, all hinged on a dog that once disappeared from Marcus's life. Torn between guilt and compassion, the millionaire faced a momentous choice. Walk away and bury the past again, or step forward, risking scandal, loss, or something far more unpredictable. The city's roar dulled around them, and in that alley's hush, a single thread of recognition bound them together, heralding a turn of events that no one, least of all the beggar and his dogs, could have foreseen. Marcus couldn't tear his gaze from the older dog's eyes. A rush of memories flooded him. The day that dog vanished from his family estate years ago, the fruitless search that followed, and the guilt he'd carried ever since. He'd told himself the dog must have been stolen or run away. Eventually, the pain dulled under the noise of business deals and expanding wealth. Yet here was that same dog, scar and all, huddled against a beggar in a grimy city alley. Marcus felt his pulse racing, unsure how to reconcile the long-lost pet before him with the new life he'd built on success and detachment. Swallowing the knot in his throat, he stooped closer. The beggar, who looked to be in his 50s, pulled the dogs protectively against his chest. One was a scrawny pup, shivering in the cold. The other, the one Marcus recognized, lifted its muzzle in a weary greeting. The man stared at Marcus with equal parts fear and curiosity, uncertain why a well-dressed stranger cared about his dogs. Marcus forced a smile, struggling to keep his emotions steady. "Sir, where did you get these dogs?" he asked softly, voice cracking. The older dog licked its nose, tail thumping weakly on the stained concrete. The beggar hesitated, then shrugged. "They found me," he mumbled, words slurring in the chill. "Got nowhere else to go, same as me." He ran a trembling hand along the older dog's back. This one turned up first, battered and starved. Then one day he brought the little one along, like he'd adopted her on the streets. The man's eyes flicked to Marcus, uncertain. "Look, mister, we're not hurting anyone. I'll move if you want us gone, but we can't go far." Despite the man's posture of dejection, there was fierce devotion in how he guarded the dogs, as though they were all that kept him grounded. Marcus shook his head, swallowing. No, I don't want you gone," he assured, words tumbling out. "It's just I think I know that dog from a long time ago." The beggar blinked, confusion knitting his brow. "Know him? He's just a stray. Why'd a man like you—" he trailed off. realizing this conversation might be bigger than any typical handout exchange. Struggling to steady himself, Marcus introduced his name and gently extended a hand for the dog to sniff. The dog's tail gave a faint wag, as if acknowledging the familiarity. Marcus's mind whirled with questions. How had the dog survived all these years? Why end up with a homeless man? Where had the dog been after disappearing from that estate? But for now, he simply asked, "Could you tell me about his scar? He didn't always have it." The beggar shrugged, glancing at the distinct mark near the dog's ear. "He had it when we met. Infected at first. I used my last few coins to get him some meds. Didn't want to see him suffer." Marcus closed his eyes. This dog had once roamed lavish green lawns and slept in a custom-built kennel. Now he endured winter nights on frigid sidewalks, reliant on a beggar's meager resources. The stark contrast almost brought tears. "Thank you," he murmured, voice shaking, "for caring for him." The beggar shifted uncomfortably, unsure if pity or opportunity flickered in Marcus's expensive suit. Feeling a surge of compassion and a moral obligation, Marcus reached into his coat, pulling out a money clip. He handed the beggar a few large bills, but the man's eyes flickered with pride or skepticism. "What do you want from us?" he asked, hugging the dogs. Marcus shook his head, emotions raw. "I don't want anything. If that dog truly belonged to me once, I owe him a better life, and you too for keeping him safe." The man's grip on the bills tightened, disbelief wrestling gratitude. The older dog let out a soft whine, perhaps sensing the tension. People on the sidewalk began to glance their way. A woman in a wool coat frowned at the spectacle of a millionaire kneeling beside a beggar. Marcus ignored the onlookers, mind racing for a plan. Part of him wanted to whisk the dog home instantly. But what about the beggar and the other puppy? It felt cruel to separate them. Another wave of guilt struck. Why had he let the dog's disappearance fade from memory for so long? At last, Marcus asked, "Would you come with me somewhere warmer? Just to talk." The beggar hesitated. "There ain't no place that'd let me bring dogs in, mister. We'll be turned away." Marcus, hardly short on resources, realized he could fix that. "We'll find a dog-friendly motel, or I'll cover a room, please." His entreaty rang with sincerity. The younger pup shivered violently, spurring the beggar to yield. "All right," he whispered, "but no tricks. Yeah, if this is some scheme," Marcus cut him off gently. "It's no scheme. I promise." Clambering to his feet, the beggar cradled the smaller pup while the older dog struggled to stand, stiff from cold and malnutrition. Marcus steadied the dog's balance, heart clenching at the visible ribs. He waved down his personal driver, who watched wide-eyed as the trio approached. "We're going to find a place for them," Marcus explained, voice firm. The driver asked no questions, accustomed to the eccentricities of wealthy clients, but evidently startled by the man and two dogs climbing into the back seat. Seated next to the beggar, pressed against the dogs, Marcus felt a surreal calm overtake him. This was the first time in years he truly acted from pure compassion rather than business logic. The older dog leaned into him, tail wagging in recognition. The younger pup, though timid, licked Marcus's hand, as if forging a new trust. The beggar sat silent, bills clutched in his pocket, eyes darting anxiously around the car's plush interior. Marcus exhaled, meeting the man's guarded stare. "Let's get you all somewhere safe," he said simply, feeling that words alone couldn't convey the guilt, relief, and renewed sense of duty swirling inside him. The car glided through the city's bustling streets, neon signs reflecting off the tinted windows. Inside, the beggar cradled the smaller pup, still shaking from cold. The older dog rested his chin on Marcus's knee, as though finding solace in the man he once knew. Marcus glanced at the trio, heart twisting with each subtle reminder of how far this dog had fallen, from a cherished companion to a half-starved stray. His grip on the situation felt fragile. He'd made a promise to help, but the details of how or where eluded him. He offered the beggar his name once more. "Call me Marcus, please," while trying to ease the tension. The beggar grunted, eyes darting around the luxurious car interior. Eventually, he revealed he was called Bill. Marcus nodded, a small step toward bridging their vastly different worlds. "Bill," he said gently, We'll find a motel that accepts dogs. I'll pay for your room tonight." Bill hesitated, likely unused to such generosity. "I appreciate it," he managed. "But if you want the dog, I guess it's yours. I won't stop you. I can't even feed them proper. We're barely surviving." He stroked the older dog's neck, voice catching. Marcus bit back a surge of emotion. Part of him might have leapt at the chance to reclaim the dog. No fuss, no questions. But seeing Bill's quiet devotion, plus the second pup clinging to them both, jarred him from selfish impulses. "We'll figure it out together," he insisted. "Not just for the dog, I recognize, but for both. And for you, too." Bill's eyes flitted with doubt, as if expecting a catch. Marcus, unsure how to prove his sincerity, remained silent, letting the statement stand. The driver found a modest motel on the outskirts, known for allowing pets if one paid a small deposit. They parked under a flickering sign, drizzle pattering on the pavement as Marcus led Bill and the dogs inside. The receptionist started to balk at the sight of two scruffy animals, but Marcus quietly placed his credit card on the counter, explaining they needed a night or two. The clerk, eyeing the unkempt duo and their canines, recognized the wealth in Marcus's crisp suit and name-brand wallet. She shrugged, handing over a room key and deposit slip for the dogs. Bill watched in awe, cheeks coloring with embarrassment. Inside the motel room, a single bed and a worn chair greeted them. The dogs sniffed the stale air, uncertain. Marcus flicked on a dull lamp, noticing Bill's guarded posture. The man wouldn't meet his eye, perhaps ashamed to be reliant on a stranger's charity. Eventually, Bill cleared his throat. "You said you know that dog. Mind telling me how?" He settled on the bed's edge, the older dog curling at his feet, the younger pup pawing at the threadbare blanket. Marcus inhaled, bracing for an explanation that bared more vulnerability than he was used to sharing. "Years ago, my family had an estate outside the city. We had several dogs, one of them special, a loyal, clever boy who never left my side." He reached to pet the older dog's scraggly fur. "One day he disappeared without a trace. We searched for weeks. I never found him. Eventually I left for college, inherited the family business, and I let the memory fade." Bill listened, eyes flicking from dog to man. Marcus paused, voice trembling slightly. "Seeing this scar near his ear, that's how I know it's him. He got that scar after tangling with a fence or something as a pup. I was the one who bandaged it the first time." Bill quietly processed the story, gaze sweeping over the dog's battered body. "So, he used to live fancy, huh?" Marcus nodded, anguish threading his tone. "Yes, but life's complicated. I never expected him to turn up like this. I feel responsible, like I abandoned him." His words tumbled out, raw. Bill gave a slight shrug. "He's been a good friend to me. Found me when I was near rock bottom. We stuck together to survive, picking scraps and sleeping under bridges." The older dog lifted his head at Bill's voice, tail giving a faint thump. The younger pup nestled at Bill's side, as though they were inseparable. The motel's heater groaned to life, blowing musty warmth. Marcus eyed the second dog. "What about her?" Bill stroked the pup's tiny ears, explaining that one stormy night, the older dog left their makeshift shelter and returned hours later with this young stray, half drowned. Since then, all three had roamed together, looking out for each other. The story peeled back layers of the older dog's unwavering loyalty. He'd lost Marcus, but found Bill, forging a new family in adversity. A lump formed in Marcus's throat. He reached into a plastic bag of supplies he'd hastily purchased at a convenience store. Some canned dog food, water bowls, cheap towels. "It's not much," he said apologetically, setting them on the small table. Bill thanked him with quiet gratitude, opening a can to feed the dogs. The older dog sniffed suspiciously, tail wagging once he recognized the smell of actual dog food rather than scraps. The pup gulped eagerly, muzzle soon coated in gravy. Bill grinned, a flash of paternal warmth that suggested this was a rare break from their daily hardships. After they ate, a hush settled in. Marcus cleared his throat, feeling the weight of decisions pressing on him. "Bill, I can't just drive away and pretend nothing happened. I want to help you both. Let me cover more than just a few nights. Maybe we find you a stable place." Bill's gaze hardened a bit, pride flaring. I ain't looking for pity. I can manage if I have half a chance. But no job will hire me with these dogs in tow. He sighed, voice drained. Look, I appreciate tonight. That's enough. Tomorrow, we'll figure something. Marcus exhaled, realizing Bill's dignity meant as much as the dog's well-being. This wasn't just about reuniting with an old pet or throwing money at the problem. Bill needed a real path forward. Let me call some contacts, he offered. At least see if there's a place that allows pets, or a job that doesn't mind them. We can't fix everything instantly, but I have resources. You have these dogs. Maybe that's a start. Bill watched him warily, as though unsure if the promise was genuine or a fleeting whim. Finally, he nodded, letting down his guard a notch. Outside, the drizzle intensified, pattering on the motel's metal roof. Inside, the older dog ambled over to Marcus, sniffing his hand. A tingle of memory coursed through him as he caressed the dog's scar, recalling carefree days of fetch and bounding across green lawns. He blinked back tears, half smiling. Hey, buddy, he whispered. I missed you. The dog's eyes, clouded by years of hardship, held an echo of recognition. In that poignant connection, Marcus sensed a bigger purpose than just reacquainting with a lost friend. This was a chance to repair the damage done, not just to the dog, but to Bill, the younger pup, and perhaps even to the calloused corners of his own heart. That night, Marcus barely slept. He lay awake in his upscale condo, mind spinning with possibilities for Bill and the two dogs. Guilt gnawed at him. He had unlimited resources, yet these three had struggled on the streets. Even more troubling, he'd failed to find his lost dog years ago. Now fate handed him a second chance, not just to reclaim the dog, but to transform Bill's grim reality. Early morning arrived, and Marcus called into the office, announcing he'd be in late. Over coffee, he scrolled through contacts, searching for anyone who might offer Bill a foothold, a job that wouldn't bar him for looking disheveled, or an apartment manager open to pets. He came up blank. People in his circle were, after all, from the top rungs, executives with strict HR rules, property owners with pristine complexes and zero tolerance for risks. Sighing, he decided to think laterally. Maybe a friend with a small business or an acquaintance in charity work might help, but it would take time, and Bill's money, especially for the dog deposit, would be non-existent. Around 9 a.m., he left for the motel with a bag of dog food, fresh clothes, and some toiletries. Pulling into the lot, he spotted Bill waiting outside, the older dog at his feet, the pup in his lap. Bill looked uneasy, as if expecting Marcus might vanish or demand the dog back. Marcus offered a small wave, stepping out of his car. Morning, he greeted softly. Bill mustered a nod, gesturing to the dogs. They're fine, ate good, but I can't keep them cooped up. We gotta move on soon. The younger pup barked once, tail wagging. The older dog recognized Marcus, trotting over to sniff his leg. Marcus knelt to pet him, feeling that old pang of lost years. Inside the cramped motel room, the stale odor of cigarettes clung to the curtains. Bill stood awkwardly as Marcus set the care items on a wobbly table. Without waiting for Bill to protest, Marcus offered a small phone, an older model, he'd activated on a cheap plan. Take this, you'll need it for job applications or contacting me, he explained. Bill stared at the device in wonder, then pocketed it with a stiff nod. Thanks, he mumbled. Then uneasy sincerity flickered across Bill's features. Look, I appreciate all this, but I don't want to be a burden. Give me a day or two. I'll find some day labor or something. Marcus admired Bill's pride, but also recognized the difficulty. He asked, mind if I take you somewhere? A friend of mine runs a small diner. Maybe you could do dishwashing or cleanup. Bill hesitated, eyes darting to the dogs. You think she'd let them be there while I work? The question hung in the air. The reality, few employers welcomed canines, especially two ragged strays, but it was a start. Marcus promised to check. They loaded the dogs into Marcus's car again. The older dog settled calmly near Bill, while the pup roamed the seat, enthralled by the passing scenery. Bill stared out the window, likely unaccustomed to traveling in comfort. They reached an unassuming diner run by an old acquaintance of Marcus's named Carrie. She greeted Marcus with mild surprise, her gaze flicking to Bill, then the dogs. Marcus quickly explained Bill's situation, how he needed a job, and how he had dogs that needed a safe place. Carrie frowned sympathetically, but admitted her diner was too small, lacking a spot for dogs. "We can't have them in the kitchen or with customers," she said. "Maybe tied outside but that's not ideal." Bill sank in disappointment. Marcus nodded, conceding this wasn't the right fit. Undeterred, Marcus tried 2 more places with similar results. Dog policies or risk concerns disqualified Bill on the spot. By midday, Bill wore a defeated expression, the younger pup napping in his arms, the older dog whining softly. Marcus stared at the city skyline in frustration. He realized a patchwork approach might fail. They needed a bigger plan. "What if we find you a small rental that allows pets, even if it's a monthly arrangement?" he suggested. Bill shook his head, voice cracking. "I've got no references, no deposit. Landlords see a homeless guy with 2 dogs. They turn me away instantly." At a loss, Marcus's phone chimed with a text from his assistant, reminding him of a crucial business meeting. He closed his eyes, torn between duty and the urgent matter at hand. Bill sensed the conflict. "Go," he said quietly. "We'll manage. You've done enough." But Marcus couldn't accept that half-hearted goodbye. He rummaged in his wallet, pressing more bills into Bill's hand. "Use this for the motel another night, or find a safe spot for the dogs." "I'll come back after the meeting." Bill tried to refuse, pride flaring, but Marcus insisted. The older dog watched the exchange with doleful eyes, as though comprehending the gravity of Bill's predicament. Leaving them near a park bench, Marcus drove off, feeling a jolt of guilt. For the next few hours, he feigned normalcy at his office, signing papers, nodding at a board discussion. Yet his mind drifted constantly to Bill, the dogs, the swirl of obstacles. After the meeting, he darted back to the park, his heart clenched in fear, imagining them gone. But near the same bench, he spotted Bill under a tree. The pups curled against him. The relief made his voice tremble as he approached. "I can't leave you all out here," he blurted. Bill just shrugged, hugging the dogs, face drawn with exhaustion. A bold idea formed in Marcus's mind, risky, unorthodox, but perhaps the only immediate fix. "Come to my place," he offered, swallowing, "temporarily. I have space. I can help you find a job. Get on your feet." Bill blinked, stunned. "Your place? A fancy condo?" He looked at the dogs, then back at Marcus, torn. The older dog perked up at the doctor's tone, wagging his tail once. The younger pup yawned in Bill's arms, oblivious to the significance. Marcus inhaled, forging ahead. "Yes, I know it's unconventional. But better than a motel you can't afford or a park bench. Let's figure out your future and these dogs together." For a long moment, Bill stared at the ground, shame and hope warring in his eyes. Then he nodded, voice barely audible. "All right, if you're sure." And so, within the span of a day, 2 dogs and 1 homeless man found themselves heading toward a billionaire's penthouse suite, a stark testament to how a lost dog's unwavering loyalty could uproot the boundaries of class, forging a path where none existed. Marcus, gripping the steering wheel, felt a mix of trepidation and renewed purpose. He'd set foot on a path of atonement, not just for losing his dog once upon a time, but for all the times he turned a blind eye to suffering. Steeling himself, he whispered to the older dog in the back seat, "Hang in there, buddy." Wheel as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Marcus pulled up to the private entrance of his upscale condominium. A valet normally handled his car, but this time he waved the attendant off, mindful that Bill and 2 dogs spilling out of a luxury vehicle would stir enough stares. Steering into a discreet side parking area, he cut the engine. Bill, in the passenger seat, sat frozen, cradling the younger pup protectively. The older dog gazed out the window with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. All 3 exuded tension, like they were trespassing in a world that wouldn't welcome them. Marcus glanced at Bill. "We'll go through a quieter entrance," he said softly, opening his door. Bill nodded, quietly swallowing. The older dog hopped down first, tail swishing low. The younger pup trembled, unsure about the looming glass facade and polished marble steps. Marcus gently closed the car door, wishing he could whisk them past the building staff without fuss. But no matter how discreet, The presence of a homeless man and two scruffy dogs would spark questions. He just hoped his clout with the condo board could smooth things over. They entered through a side door marked service entrance, stepping into a pristine corridor lit by recessed lights. Bill lingered behind, his worn sneakers squeaking on the glossy floor. The dog sniffed anxiously, nails clicking. Marcus led them to a private elevator typically reserved for deliveries. Eyes flicking to Bill, he tried a reassuring smile. "We'll avoid the main lobby. Once we're upstairs, we'll be fine." Bill managed a shaky nod. The older dog pressed close to him, remembering the lessons of street survival. Stay invisible. The elevator rose smoothly, no stutter or clang, reflecting the building's high-end design. Bill rubbed the pup's ears, his own nerves frayed. Meanwhile, Marcus stared at the passing floors, bracing for potential confrontation with building security, but they reached his penthouse level unnoticed. As the doors slid open, they stepped into a hushed hallway lined with modern art and plush carpeting. Bill exhaled in awe, tucking the pup closer. The older dog's nails sank into the thick carpet, tail wagging uncertainly. Marcus guided them through the polished double doors into his expansive living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city lights below, and sleek furniture, all neutral tones, gave the space a refined, minimalist air. Bill paused in the doorway, face unreadable. The younger pup stared wide-eyed at the vast open area. The older dog sniffed a designer couch, uncertain if it was allowed. Marcus set down his keys. "Make yourself at home," he said, voice taut with empathy. "It's not... well, I know it's a huge change." Bill moved stiffly into the living room, lowering the pup onto a plush rug. The dog sniffed around, tail slowly lifting from a half-tuck. Meanwhile, Bill's shoulders sagged as though exhausted by the day's events. Marcus quietly offered him a seat, but Bill settled on the floor beside the dogs, as if that felt safer. They lingered in awkward silence until Marcus cleared his throat. "Hungry? I can order something. My kitchen's not well stocked, but we can do delivery." Bill nodded hesitantly, eyes drifting to the glimmering night view. "Sure, thanks," he mumbled. "But are you sure this is okay? The building manager won't flip about me." Marcus recalled the building's strict policies. "I'll handle it," he promised. "Technically, as a penthouse owner, I can have guests. The dog policy. Well, I'm allowed pets." "We'll manage." Bill gave a slow, tentative smile, relief warring with lingering shame. The older dog edged over to Marcus, sniffing his pant leg as though recognizing an old friend. Marcus knelt, stroking its back. Memories of boyhood days at the estate flickered, throwing a ball across lush lawns, coaxing the dog to swim in a pool. Seeing the dog's worn fur and slight limp from street living, remorse coiled anew. Gently, he whispered an apology the dog could never fully comprehend. A short while later, a delivery arrived with hot noodles and chicken skewers. Bill ate slowly on the floor, feeding tidbits to the dogs. Marcus watched from the couch, marveling at how the older dog shared scraps with the younger pup, never snapping or hoarding. That quiet generosity echoed Bill's own devotion, forging a tiny family built on mutual survival. After dinner, Marcus offered Bill the spare bedroom, mindful of the building's hush this late at night. Bill hesitated, reluctant to soil the pristine sheets with his ragged clothes. But the dogs needed a safe spot to rest. Ultimately, Bill allowed Marcus to lend him sweatpants and a t-shirt so he could shower and not feel grimy. The younger pup, exhausted, curled up on the floor at Bill's side. The older dog hovered near Marcus, tail swishing in cautious affection. The scene struck Marcus as surreal, a once-lost dog from his privileged past, now bridging him to a man living on the margins. He realized the old dog might carry no grudges, only relief at being inside with warmth, surrounded by those who cared. That acceptance humbled Marcus. The clamor of stock trades, real estate deals, or society galas felt distant compared to this raw humanness. Later, as Bill and the pups settled into the spare bedroom, Marcus retreated to his own. Lying awake, he worried about tomorrow's potential fallout, neighbors complaining, building management enforcing rules, the tabloids sniffing out a millionaire and homeless man living together scandal. Another part of him argued that it didn't matter. He had resources enough to help Bill find a stable job or an apartment that allowed dogs, and this might be the final step in redeeming what he lost with the dog's disappearance all those years ago. If the older dog was content, if Bill and the second pup could breathe easy for once, then no price or hassle could outweigh that. Morning broke with pale sunlight streaming into the penthouse. Marcus rose to check on Bill, quietly opening the spare bedroom door. He found Bill curled in bed, the younger pup sprawled across his legs, and the older dog on a plush rug snoring softly. The sight drew a gentle smile. For a moment, everything was simple, just a man and his dogs, safe and warm. The tension from the night before eased. Then Bill stirred awake, blinking at the lavish surroundings as though confirming it wasn't a dream. Meeting Marcus's gaze, he mustered a half grin. "Never slept in a place like this," he admitted. "Thanks." Marcus nodded, stepping back to give them privacy. Inwardly, he affirmed his plan: connect Bill with a stable job, pay the deposit for a dog-friendly rental, ensure the dogs had medical care. He could do it if Bill let him, but forging that path gracefully, without trampling Bill's pride, would be delicate. Meanwhile, the older dog stretched and padded over, pressing its nose to Marcus's hand. The unspoken message in the dog's eyes was as clear as ever. "You found me. Now help him." And for the first time in years, Marcus felt truly at peace with the mission set before him. When Bill emerged from the spare bedroom, he wore the borrowed t-shirt and sweatpants, looking far less tense than the day before. The two dogs trailed behind him, noses quivering at the unfamiliar sense of Marcus's immaculate penthouse. Marcus greeted them with a nod, setting out a quick breakfast. Coffee for Bill, simple sandwiches, and fresh water for the dogs. The older dog gingerly sniffed the food bowl, then ate with visible relief, while the younger pup pounced on her portion, tail wagging in gratitude. A quiet unease still hovered. Bill mumbled thanks, eyes darting away if Marcus tried to discuss anything more personal. Sensing Bill's hesitance, Marcus steered the conversation toward practicalities. He asked if Bill had any job skills or past work experience. Bill shrugged, mentioning a string of odd jobs: construction day labor, restaurant dishwashing, some handyman tasks, nothing sustained due to lost housing and mounting setbacks. "Every time I try to rebuild, something knocks me down," he murmured, hand unconsciously stroking the older dog's scarred back. Marcus gave a reassuring nod, thinking of the older dog's resilience, battered but unbroken. "We'll find you something," he said, voice firm. The dogs finished eating, flopping contentedly on the living room rug. Marcus suggested they walk them around the block, partly to let the dogs stretch their legs, partly to gauge how the neighborhood might react to Bill's presence. Bill tensed, glancing at his threadbare shoes and borrowed clothes, but consented, leashing the pups with spare leads Marcus kept from his estate days. The younger pup wagged, excited by the prospect of exploring. The older dog ambled calmly, trusting Marcus's guidance. Outside, the upscale high-rise corridor loomed, polished floors echoing their footsteps. A curious neighbor passed by, eyeing Bill and the dogs with a raised brow. Marcus offered a polite nod. The neighbor said nothing but kept walking. They rode the elevator to ground level, hearts pounding at the potential stairs. But in the lobby, only a bored security guard took mild notice. Marcus led them through the side exit, avoiding the main doors, stepping into the crisp morning air. For a few blocks, they wandered quiet streets lined with boutiques and cafes. Pedestrians occasionally stared at the dogs, especially the older one, sporting scars, or the younger's skittish stance. Bill's grip on the leash tightened. Marcus, noticing his tension, gently reassured him that it would be fine. Each time they passed a glitzy storefront or encountered a sidelong glance, Bill's posture curled inward, as though he didn't belong. Yet the dogs seemed content, sniffing lampposts and cracks in the sidewalk, oblivious to human judgments. Eventually, Marcus steered them to a small park, hoping to let the dogs roam on a grassy patch. Bill exhaled relief, loosening the leashes. The younger pup scampered in circles, her tail ablur, while the older dog padded slowly, nose to the ground. Marcus smiled faintly, though this city block might be the first time the older dog felt safe enough to simply sniff grass. Bill watched, voice hushed, He's happier already. Marcus nodded, a soft warmth in his chest. Maybe I can give them a chance at happiness, but reality tapped his shoulder in the form of his phone buzzing. Work demanded him. A board member needed signatures. A conference call was scheduled. He sighed, telling Bill he had to head to the office soon. Bill's face flickered with anxiety. What would he do, alone in this neighborhood with 2 dogs? Sensing Bill's unease, Marcus made a quick decision. You can stay at my place if you want to rest, he offered, or come with me for a while. My office has a lounge. I'm the boss, so no one will question it. Bill, torn between accepting more generosity or drifting aimlessly, relented. I guess I'll come. Don't want to be in your condo alone. Leaving the park, they hailed a ride back to the penthouse for Bill to gather the borrowed phone and a coat. Then, all 4, Bill, Marcus, and the dogs, piled into Marcus's personal driver's car for the trip to Marcus's corporate headquarters. The notion of entering a glass skyscraper with 2 strays and a homeless man felt surreal, yet Marcus's resolve held. He guided them to a private side entrance again, where a receptionist greeted him with a startled expression but offered no protest. Marcus's authority, combined with his calm determination, smoothed the way. Inside, Bill clutched the leashes, awe swirling as he observed the polished floors and modern decor. Employees watched curiously, some whispering, but no one blocked their path. Marcus led them to a vacant lounge on an upper floor, usually reserved for VIP guests. He set Bill and the dogs up with bottled water, a small couch, and asked a trusted assistant to bring snacks. Bill looked around, overwhelmed. "Am I allowed here?" he asked, voice hushed. Marcus nodded, forcing a reassuring smile. "You're my guest. Relax while I handle some business. If you need anything, just ask my assistant, Claire." So Bill and the dogs settled into a plush nook with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The older dog dozed at Bill's feet, the younger pup exploring every corner. Meanwhile, Marcus hurried to his office, mind-juggling work tasks and an impending plan to secure Bill a job lead. Phone calls flew. He reached out to an acquaintance who managed a small contracting firm. Another contact who ran a dog-friendly cafe. Most turned him down politely, citing concerns about reliability or backgrounds. But after an hour, he found a lukewarm maybe, a warehouse manager needing part-time help, open to the idea if Bill could prove stable. It was a start, not a guarantee. At lunch break, the doctor returned to the lounge. He found Bill reading a newspaper Claire had given him, dogs curled up at his side. Bill looked almost peaceful, though shadows of insecurity lingered in his gaze. Marcus sat beside him, relating the warehouse lead. "Could be something," he said softly. Bill listened, nodding with cautious hope. Then he admitted he had no official ID or address. Potential hurdles for employment paperwork. Marcus pressed his lips thin. "We can fix that," he said, recalling how simple documents were a luxury Bill lacked. Before they could talk further, a knock sounded. One of Marcus's junior associates poked his head in, eyes flicking from Bill to the dogs. "Sir, the CFO's about to start the conference call." Marcus stood, apologizing to Bill. Bill just gave a weak smile, used to being sidelined. The older dog raised its head, as though sensing departure. But the doctor laid a gentle hand on its scarred back. "I'll be right back," he murmured. Inside, tension mounted. Running a corporation while harboring Bill and 2 dogs felt like balancing 2 separate lives, each with immense stakes. Yet every time he glimpsed the dog's trusting eyes, he knew there was no turning back. Marcus hurried from the conference room, juggling paperwork and phone messages from his CFO. Although the meeting had gone smoothly, thoughts of Bill and the dogs kept surfacing. The tension of balancing a corporate empire with the fragile situation in his lounge weighed on him more than any financial deal. Exiting onto the executive floor, he made his way to the private lounge. He half feared that building security might have intervened or Bill might have panicked and fled. But inside, he found Bill seated by the window, the older dog lying at his feet and the younger pup curled on a worn cushion. A mild sense of relief washed over him. Noticing Marcus's arrival, Bill rose abruptly, nearly knocking the younger pup aside. The older dog lifted his head, ears perked. "Did everything go all right?" Bill asked, voice hushed, as though uncertain if speaking too loudly in such a glossy environment might cause trouble. Marcus nodded, forcing a reassuring smile. "Meeting's done. How about you? Any issues?" Bill shook his head. "Your assistant came by, offered some coffee. The dogs have been quiet." Then he added, almost self-conscious, "It's nice of you letting us stay here." Marcus set aside a manila folder, stepping closer. He saw Bill's eyes flick to the polished floors, the modern furniture, a far cry from life on the streets. "Look," Marcus said gently, "I've been making calls. There's a potential lead at a small warehouse, clerk or basic labor. They might consider giving you a shot if I vouch for you." Bill exhaled, tension and hope mingling. "What about the dogs, though?" "I can't leave them alone in your fancy condo, and I doubt the warehouse wants them around." Marcus understood the dilemma. "We'll figure out short-term dog care. My assistant, or a pet daycare, maybe. Once you're on your feet, you can get a place that allows pets." Bill hesitated. Glancing down at the older dog, he gently rubbed the dog's scarred ear, face lined with worry. "I don't want to be a problem for you, but this is the first chance we've had in a while. If that job works out, I'll repay you somehow." The younger pup, sensing Bill's tension, hopped onto his lap. Marcus felt a stirring of compassion, recalling how quickly his lost dog had formed a new pack. "Think of it not as a debt," he said. "Consider it a rescue mission for all of us." They spent the next hour sketching out a plan. Ms. Daniels from the charity had texted him, offering to expedite any ID documents Bill needed, possibly reissuing a state ID or social security card if Bill had none. The real sticking point was bridging the gap until Bill could secure his first paycheck. Marcus resolved to cover basic living expenses temporarily, ignoring Bill's attempts to refuse. "Let me do this," he insisted. "The dogs needed you, and you kept them alive. Now I can help keep you afloat." After finalizing a loose timeline, Marcus realized Bill probably felt cooped up in the lounge. "How about we head back to my place? You can rest, feed the dogs, maybe practice basic tasks for that warehouse job," he suggested. Bill agreed quietly, gathering the leashes. The older dog stood, wagging tail at Marcus, as though acknowledging the synergy blossoming among them all. The younger pup let out a squeak of excitement, bounding across the lounge, prompting Bill to scoop her up. On the drive home, Bill stared out the car window. Passing sleek skyscrapers and upscale apartments, he murmured, "Never thought I'd be seeing these from inside a nice car, instead of huddled by a vent for warmth." The older dog rested its chin on Bill's knee, a gesture of solidarity. Marcus, eyes on the road, responded in a subdued tone, "I never thought I'd be rescuing a dog I lost years ago, or that he'd come with a friend like you." The remark sparked a faint smile on Bill's lips. For the first time, an air of camaraderie replaced the wariness between them. Back at the penthouse, the building staff offered only polite nods, likely under instructions not to question the boss's visitors. Once inside, Bill took the dogs to the balcony for fresh air. The older dog gazed at the panoramic view, an expanse of twinkling lights far different from the dingy underpass it once called home. The younger pup nosed at a potted plant, tail wagging uncertainly. Bill's eyes shone with disbelief. "Never saw the city from this high up," he murmured. Marcus grabbed leftover groceries from the kitchen, preparing a modest dinner, pasta for the humans, canned dog food for the canines. While Bill helped set the table, the older dog ambled over to Marcus, leaning into his leg in that old familiar way. A pang shot through him, remembering how they used to share quiet nights in his family estate. The dog's unwavering trust both comforted and shamed him. He'd let it slip away once. Now he vowed not to fail him or Bill again. As they ate, conversation drifted between job prospects and Bill's memories from the streets, how the older dog would scavenge scraps, sometimes returning with enough to feed the pup. Marcus asked about the dog's scar, and Bill recounted how he'd tended to it when it reopened, nearly causing infection. "He's loyal," Bill said, stroking the dog's ears. "Never left me, not even in storms. Guess he was looking for something, though. Maybe you." Supper ended with quiet contentment. Bill offered to wash dishes, but Marcus waved him off, encouraging him to rest. The dogs dozed by the living room couch, lulled by full bellies and warmth. Bill sank onto an armchair, letting out a shaky sigh. "I can't wrap my head around this kindness," he admitted. Marcus settled opposite him. "Sometimes we all need a break," he replied softly. "A chance to reset. You, me, these dogs. We each lost something. Now we help each other find it again." The evening wore on, the penthouse cast in soft lamplight. Bill eventually retired to the spare bedroom with both dogs, the younger pup bounding in circles, the older dog yawning widely. Marcus lingered in the living room, flipping through emails on his phone but paying them little mind. He caught himself smiling, a sense of purpose coursing through him. Tomorrow, they'd set the next steps in motion, arranging Bill's documents, meeting the warehouse manager, and hopefully securing a small foothold in normalcy. Until then, he savored this fragile harmony. A dog once lost, now forging a bridge between wealth and homelessness, reminded him that empathy knows no social barrier and that redemption can come in the most unexpected forms. Morning arrived with a timid sun casting pale beams across the penthouse. Marcus, up early, found Bill already in the kitchen, rummaging for a kettle to heat water. The two dogs hovered at Bill's feet, the older one leaning its head against him as though they'd shared this routine for months. It struck Marcus how easily Bill adapted to domestic life, despite years of homelessness. He quietly admired the scene, Bill patting the older dog, the younger pup watching with bright curiosity, as if a small family unit had formed in his once sterile home. They exchanged a few words about the day's agenda. Marcus planned to take Bill to the warehouse for an informal interview, hoping his personal recommendation would carry weight. Bill, nerves taut, asked if he should change clothes. Marcus lent him another spare shirt and pair of jeans. Though Bill wore them self-consciously, it was an improvement over worn-out garments. The dogs ate their breakfast of kibble, tails wagging in synchronization. Soon they all piled into Marcus's car. The older dog settled calmly near Bill, while the pup hopped on the back seat, spinning in circles before nestling down. Driving across town, Marcus felt a swirl of optimism and tension. This warehouse job might be Bill's first real step toward independence, yet it hinged on a manager's goodwill, someone who might prejudge Bill's ragged background. The older dog gently nudged Bill's arm, as if sensing his anxiety. Bill exhaled, smiling faintly. "Guess they're my good luck charms." Arriving at a nondescript industrial park, Marcus pulled up to a modest one-story building with loading docks. The manager, a graying man named Fred, stepped out, eyebrows raised at the sight of two dogs and a homeless man emerging from a luxury vehicle. Marcus, aware of how strange it looked, extended a hand in greeting, explaining Bill's situation plainly, but without pity. "He's got experience doing odd jobs. He's reliable, just needs a chance." Bill stood awkwardly, fidgeting with the dog's leashes. Fred scratched his chin, scanning Bill's face, the dog's, then Marcus's expensive attire. "You're vouching for him, huh?" Fred asked, voice neutral. Marcus nodded earnestly. "Yes, and I'll cover any initial costs, uniforms, safety gear, whatever." Bill's cheeks flushed, caught between gratitude and embarrassment. The older dog let out a soft whine, possibly sensing the tension. Fred took in the scene, then shrugged. "Okay, let's talk inside." "But the dogs wait here." Bill glanced nervously at the dogs, crouching to stroke the older one's ears. Marcus offered to stand watch. Relieved, Bill followed Fred into the warehouse. Marcus, waiting by the car, tried to keep the dogs calm. The younger pup sprawled on the pavement, sunning herself, while the older dog paced, ears flicking as though on alert. Marcus patted his shoulder, whispering that Bill would be back soon. Time dragged. After a solid half hour, Bill and Fred returned. The expression on Bill's face said it all. A glimmer of hope, mingled with lingering doubt. Fred sighed, turning to Marcus. "He seems decent. I'll give him a trial shift tomorrow. If he shows up, works hard, maybe it becomes permanent." Bill bobbed his head, words tumbling in relieved gratitude. Marcus thanked Fred, discreetly handing him a business card, stating he'd personally cover any transitional costs. Fred pocketed it, half smiling. "If this works out, it'll be a new record for me. Never hired anyone with a reference like you." Then he waved them off, returning to the clang of loading pallets. Back in the car, Bill let out a shaky laugh. "Can't believe it. a real shift. Tomorrow. He hugged the older dog, the younger pup licking his face. Marcus felt a surge of optimism. Step 1 accomplished. Now the question, where would Bill and the dog stay if the job panned out? He couldn't impose indefinite shelter in his penthouse, especially with building regulations looming, but at least Bill could earn a wage, maybe rent a dog-friendly room. They'd figure it out piece by piece. Returning home, Bill carried a renewed posture, shoulders less slumped. The older dog trotted confidently at his side, the pup bounding around. Marcus pointed out a few local shops where Bill might pick up daily clothes once he had some money. Bill nodded eagerly, though he still tensed whenever they passed wealthier neighbors who cast quizzical glances. The older dog, ignoring potential scorn, stuck close to Bill. It reminded Marcus of how the dog once shadowed him in childhood, loyal without questioning status or appearance. That evening, to celebrate, Marcus ordered a takeout feast. Hearty soup, grilled chicken, fresh bread. Bill seemed overwhelmed by the spread. The dogs enjoyed extra scraps, devouring them with unbridled enthusiasm. After dinner, they lounged in the living room, the older dog resting his muzzle on Bill's knee, the pup napping belly up. Marcus let them watch a bit of TV, which Bill found mesmerizing after years without access. They chatted quietly about small details, favorite foods, stray dog tales, glimpses of Bill's past before he hit the streets. Bit by bit, a friendship bloomed beyond their unusual arrangement, but a phone call shattered the calm. The building's property manager, Marcus, stepping into the hallway, took the call in terse silence. The manager politely but firmly expressed concerns about an unregistered occupant and 2 dogs. While tenants could have pets, they needed to follow the building's formal registration, and allowing a homeless man to stay indefinitely might breach lease clauses. Marcus suppressed frustration, explaining the situation was temporary. The manager insisted they hold a board meeting soon to discuss compliance. Marcus ended the call, lips pressed tight. Another hurdle. He re-entered the living room, forcing a casual smile so as not to worry Bill. Before bed, Bill offered to sleep in the living room to avoid stirring tension if building staff unexpectedly inspected. Marcus refused, stating the spare bedroom was Bill's for now. The older dog curled at Bill's feet as they turned in, the younger pup hogging the foot of the bed. Marcus retreated to his own room, heart heavy with the knowledge that not everyone welcomed this arrangement. He'd handle it. He had the means and determination, but each obstacle reminded him that bridging 2 worlds wasn't a matter of a few kind gestures. It required relentless effort to shift mindsets, rules, and assumptions. Late that night, the doctor paced his bedroom, glimpsing the older dog asleep in the adjacent room. He felt a surge of protectiveness. He wouldn't let building politics jeopardize Bill's fresh start or the dog's newfound security. The dog once lost to him deserved permanent belonging, whether by Bill's side or, if necessary, his own. The next days would test how far he was willing to push against the fortress of privilege he inhabited. Steeling himself with the memory of that dog's unwavering loyalty, he vowed not to yield to pressure. If the man and the dogs needed him, he'd fight to keep them sheltered, no matter the personal or social cost. Morning brought a sharp knock on the penthouse door. Marcus, hurrying to get Bill ready for his trial shift at the warehouse, paused in the hallway. The dogs pricked their ears. Bill froze, fear flickering across his face. He likely suspected building management had finally come to evict him. Steadying himself, Marcus opened the door. Sure enough, the property manager and a stern-faced woman from the condo board stood there, eyes flicking over the dogs and Bill as they stepped inside. "Mr. Turner," the manager began formally, "we need to address the unregistered occupant and pets." He glanced at Bill's worn sneakers, the dogs sniffing at the intruders. Marcus exhaled calmly, determined not to let them push Bill or the dogs into panic. He invited them to speak in the living room, carefully ushering Bill and the pups to the side. Bill tried to fade into the background, anxiety clear in his posture. The older dog sensed his tension, pressing close to Bill's leg. The woman from the board, Ms. Greenwood, pursed her lips at the sight of dog fur on the pristine furniture. She explained the building's regulations for guest stays and pet registrations, concluding that Bill's indefinite presence violated policies. "We're sympathetic," Miss Greenwood said in a clipped tone, "but this is a high-end residence. Safety, cleanliness, and the comfort of other tenants are paramount. If your friend can't formalize his stay, he needs to leave. The dogs, likewise, require immediate registration and compliance with breed and size rules." Marcus, swallowing a surge of frustration, nodded curtly. "I understand the rules, but this is a temporary humanitarian situation. Bill is in the process of getting a job, and these dogs are well behaved." He gestured at the older dog lying quietly by Bill's feet. "I'll cover any necessary fees or deposits." The manager and Ms. Greenwood exchanged glances. "Even so, Miss," Greenwood said, "the bylaws require board approval for a second occupant more than 30 consecutive days, especially one without clear income or references." Bill's cheeks burned at the subtext. He was seen as a vagrant, unfit for these polished corridors. Marcus maintained composure, politely stating, "Please give us a short extension. Bill has a job interview lined up and should be able to secure housing soon. Once that's settled, he'll move out. The dogs will remain in my care if needed." The manager sighed, eyeing Miss Greenwood, who pursed her lips again. After a tense moment, she relented. "We'll allow a 2-week grace period. If he's not gone or meeting compliance by then, we'll escalate. And the dogs must be registered within 48 hours. Any damages or complaints will be on you." Relief mingled with tension. Marcus thanked them stiffly, escorting them back to the door. Once it clicked shut, Bill exhaled, shoulders sagging. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I knew this would cause trouble." Marcus shook his head, determined. "No need to apologize. We have 2 weeks. Let's make it work." The older dog rose, tail wagging as though sensing a small victory. The younger pup hopped about, oblivious to the grown-up worries. They rushed to prepare for Bill's trial shift, feeding the dogs before piling into Marcus's car again. The older dog settled calmly in the back seat, the younger pup dozing. Bill fiddled with the borrowed phone, practicing how he'd explain his background if asked. Marcus, trying to instill confidence, gave tips on what to emphasize: reliability, willingness to learn. Bill nodded, a tremor of fear in his eyes. "I can't blow this chance," he whispered. The older dog, sensing Bill's nerves, rested its chin on his knee, an unspoken show of support. At the warehouse, Fred greeted them, glancing at the dogs. "No animals allowed inside, but they can wait out here if it's just a few hours," he said, slightly reluctant. The older dog whined, tail uncertain. Bill frowned, explaining that the younger pup might panic alone. Marcus stepped in. "I can stay with them for now, or find a daycare. We just need Bill to do his shift." Fred shrugged. "Fine, but don't cause a scene. If Bill works out, maybe we can figure something more permanent." Nerves high, Bill followed Fred into the warehouse, leaving Marcus outside with the dogs. The older dog stared at the door, as if wanting to follow but trusting Marcus's guidance. In that quiet parking lot, Marcus paced with the leashes, occasionally sitting on a concrete curb while the pups sniffed around. A wave of surrealism hit him. Just a short while ago, his biggest concerns were corporate expansions and board meetings. Now he was babysitting 2 strays, so a homeless man could earn a chance at stability. Yet it felt more meaningful than any business deal he'd closed in years. 2 hours later, Fred emerged, beckoning Marcus and the dogs over. Inside, Bill labored among stacked boxes, carefully labeling items. Marcus glimpsed Bill's focus, sweat on his brow, but a determined glint in his eyes. Fred muttered, "He's doing okay. Can't promise anything yet, but if this shift goes fine, I'll bring him back tomorrow." Marcus exhaled relief. The older dog perked up, tail wagging at Bill's distant figure. The younger pup tugged the leash, curious about the warehouse's echoing interior. Fred waved them off, returning to supervise Bill's tasks. By lunchtime, Bill stepped out for a short break, panting lightly. He collapsed on a bench near Marcus and the dogs, wiping his brow. "It's tougher than I remembered," he murmured, eyeing a small bruise on his arm. "But Fred hasn't yelled at me yet. That's a good sign." Marcus offered a water bottle, resisting the urge to fuss. The older dog sniffed Bill's clothes, tail wagging as if praising his effort. The younger pup placed her paws on Bill's knee, likely demanding a pat for moral support. In that moment, seeing Bill's fatigued yet hopeful expression, Marcus felt a surge of pride. This was exactly what Bill needed, an honest chance, free from the weight of survival on the streets. The dogs, once companions in hardship, now spurred him toward normalcy. Marcus realized the homeless man and strays bridging into his corporate realm wasn't just random charity, it was an intertwining of destinies. If Bill succeeded, they'd all defy the cynicism that assumed a man down on his luck, saddled with dogs, couldn't rise again. After the break, Bill returned to work. Marcus used the lull to make more phone calls about short-term rentals, searching for something small but pet-friendly, ideally within commute distance. He snagged one lead, a modest studio near the warehouse, though the landlord was wary of 2 dogs. Marcus offered to pay a triple deposit if that swayed them. The landlord agreed to a viewing in 2 days. Hope rose again. If Bill secured this job, passed the 2-week building grace period, and moved to that studio, all the puzzle pieces might finally fit. Meanwhile, the dogs had to remain well-behaved and out of trouble. As the shift ended, Bill stumbled outside, sweaty but grinning. Fred clapped his shoulder. "You didn't slack, kid. Show up tomorrow at 7, we'll see if we make it permanent." Bill thanked him fervently, relief flooding his stance. The older dog trotted over, tail wagging. Bill scooped the pup into a quick hug, voice cracking with elation. Marcus stood by, heart brimming with triumph. Step by step, they were conquering each obstacle. Despite the condo board's looming ultimatum, Bill's blossoming work prospects hinted at a brighter future. For him and the dogs, and for Marcus, each small victory reaffirmed that bridging vast social gaps wasn't impossible, so long as compassion led the way. In the following days, Bill's daily routine took shape. Each morning, the doctor drove him and the dogs out to the warehouse. Bill clocked in, eager to prove himself, while the dogs waited with the doctor, or sometimes at a nearby pet daycare. By dusk, they all returned to the penthouse. The building staff, though wary of Bill's prolonged stay, kept quiet under Marcus's firm assurances. Meanwhile, Bill's performance at the warehouse impressed Fred enough that he offered a full week's schedule. Bill, thrilled and exhausted, dedicated every ounce of energy to stacking boxes and sorting items, determined not to squander this rare chance. The older dog adjusted surprisingly well to the new rhythms, greeting Bill each evening with a wagging tail, as if congratulating him on another successful shift. The younger pup-hound, for her part, reveled in exploring the penthouse's nooks, occasionally sneaking into corners until Bill called her back with soft admonitions. Marcus observed these moments, heart warmed by the harmony forging between them all. Even so, a ticking clock loomed, the condo board's 2-week grace period. Time slipped away with each sunrise. During any spare breaks, Marcus and Bill scouted potential rentals for Bill. They visited the modest studio near the warehouse, the landlord giving them a once-over with skeptical eyes. But upon witnessing Bill's respectful demeanor and the dog's calm behavior, plus Marcus's promise of a triple deposit, the landlord wavered, asking for an official reference from Fred. They agreed to return in a few days, hopefully finalizing a lease if all went well. Meanwhile, Ms. Daniels assisted Bill in retrieving some old identification records from a battered storage unit. She marveled at how far he'd come in just a short span. Seeing Bill in fresh clothes, with a job and the dogs groomed, underscored the power of stable support. And for the older dog, once the doctor's lost companion, this stable environment seemed to spark more frequent reminders of their past bond. Sometimes the dog followed the doctor around the penthouse, pressing a muzzle against him in quiet recognition. Of course, not everything was smooth. On the 10th day, building security reported a neighbor's complaint about excessive barking. The younger pup, anxious when Bill left for the warehouse, had yipped at passing footsteps outside the penthouse door. Marcus quelled the complaint by explaining the situation, promising to keep the pup in the interior rooms. But each incident ratcheted up the tension. One more complaint, and the board might forcibly evict Bill and the dogs. Bill, noticing the stress, offered to move out sooner, even if it meant a motel or sleeping in the warehouse's parking lot. Marcus refused, insisting they'd soon finalize the studio lease. "Just a few more days," he repeated, though his own heart pounded each time the condo phone rang. He'd grown used to Bill's presence, appreciating the casual chats over dinner, the warmth of two dogs snuggling at their feet. Letting them go was inevitable, but he longed for a dignified departure, not a forced eviction. Fred's reference came through a day later, praising Bill's punctuality and hard work. The landlord of the studio, swayed by the deposit offer, agreed to sign a lease that Saturday, provided Bill could pay the first month up front. Marcus discreetly arranged to cover that cost. Bill's eyes brimmed with gratitude, though a flicker of shame lingered. "I hate depending on you," he whispered, "but I can't repay everything yet." Marcus reassured him, voice gentle, "Focus on building your life back. That's repayment enough." Finally, the day arrived to sign the lease. After Bill's shift, they drove to the modest building, a small, older complex but dog-friendly if tenants covered a pet deposit. The landlord handed over papers for Bill to sign, glancing warily at the older dog and the younger pup. Marcus produced the deposit and first month's rent. Bill, hand trembling, scrawled his name at the bottom, becoming an official tenant. The landlord's expression softened slightly at the clear determination in Bill's face. "Keep the dogs under control, no damage, and we're fine," he said gruffly. Walking back to the car, lease in hand, Bill let out a shaky laugh of relief. The older dog followed, wagging his tail as though sensing Bill's triumph. Marcus gave Bill's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You did it," he murmured. "Now you have your own place." Bill nodded, tears glinting in his eyes. "Wouldn't have happened without you," he said, voice thick. Glancing at the dogs, he added, "And them too, of course." There remained a final hurdle. The apartment needed a bit of cleaning and furniture, plus basic supplies. Marcus didn't hesitate. He took Bill shopping for a cheap mattress, a second-hand couch, and dog essentials. Although Bill protested each purchase, the doctor insisted it was a small price for setting them up for success. "Soon, you'll have paychecks," Marcus reminded him. "You can handle the rest." Meanwhile, the dogs padded behind them in a pet-friendly store, sniffing new leashes. Bill selected a bright pink harness for the younger pup, laughing at how she batted at it playfully. By evening, they hauled the small haul of furniture into the studio. It was far from luxurious. Peeling paint, a narrow kitchen, a single window overlooking a crowded alley. But to Bill's eyes, it was a palace of hope. The older dog sniffed every corner, tail wagging, while the pup leapt onto the new couch, claiming it instantly. Bill perched on the mattress, running his fingers over the worn fabric. "This is home now," he breathed. Marcus stood nearby, exhaustion and contentment mingling in his chest. "We did it," he thought, remembering the condo board's deadline looming. They'd managed just in time. Tomorrow, Bill would move in fully, taking the dogs permanently from the penthouse. Marcus felt a pang imagining his quiet home returning to its sterile calm. Yet seeing Bill's radiant pride at having a roof of his own, the doctor knew this was the right conclusion. The older dog padded over, pressing its muzzle gently to Marcus's hand, a final gesture of gratitude. Marcus smiled, brushing the dog's ears. "You found him a home, old friend," he whispered. "Let's see where life takes you both next." Night approached, and after a quick dinner of takeout in Bill's half-furnished studio, they parted ways. Marcus returned to the penthouse alone, the emptiness more pronounced than ever. But for once, it didn't feel hollow. He sensed a deep satisfaction that overshadowed any echo of loneliness. The dogs were safe, Bill was on his way to reclaiming dignity, and the older dog's unwavering loyalty had steered them all to this outcome. There might be more challenges, but right now the future looked bright. With that thought, Marcus finally slept peacefully, dreams untroubled by regrets or doubts, content in knowing that loyalty and compassion had prevailed against every barrier. The morning air felt strangely still as Marcus parked outside Bill's new studio apartment. He carried a small box of supplies, spare kitchen utensils, dog treats, and a few leftover items Bill had forgotten in the penthouse. Approaching the building's worn exterior, Marcus realized this would be the first day Bill woke up in his own place, with no looming threat of eviction or stares from condo neighbors. A surge of relief and subtle longing mingled in his chest. He'd miss seeing the dogs each morning, especially the older one who once belonged to him. He buzzed the door, tension coiling. Soon, Bill opened up, hair tousled, but eyes bright with possibility. The dogs barked excitedly at the visitor. The younger pup nearly toppled Bill over with tail-thumping enthusiasm, while the older dog approached Marcus, pressing its head to his knees. Marcus knelt to greet them, ruffling the pup's floppy ears, then the older dog's familiar scar. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, trying not to dwell on memories of the dog's old life. Bill ushered him inside, the cramped space still smelling faintly of fresh paint from a quick fix the landlord did. A cheap lamp cast warm light over sparse furniture, a mattress in one corner, a small couch and a second-hand table. It might have looked shabby to some, but pride shone in Bill's eyes. "It's not the penthouse, but it's home," he said with a bashful grin. Marcus handed over the box of supplies. Bill thanked him softly, setting them on the table. The older dog sniffed the box, tail wagging. The younger pup trotted around, occasionally yapping at a flicker of sunlight on the wall. Marcus settled onto the couch, scanning Bill's face for signs of stress. "How's your first night here?" he asked. Bill exhaled a shaky laugh. "Weird, but good. No fear someone would kick us out. Dogs slept well. I start my shift again soon. Fred texted me about a morning delivery." The mention of work brought a flicker of purpose to Bill's posture. They chatted about scheduling. Bill's plan to wake early, feed the dogs, then bus to the warehouse. Marcus offered help if the bus route was tricky. Bill insisted he'd figure it out. "You've done enough," he repeated, yet he didn't reject Marcus's presence, hinting that the moral support eased his new responsibilities. The older dog, hearing them talk, lay contentedly by Bill's feet, while the younger pup gnawed a squeaky toy. A peace hovered, one that belied how uncertain the future remained. Soon, Bill prepared to leave for his shift, rummaging for his worker ID and a tattered backpack. The dogs whined, used to going along, but Bill gently patted their heads. "Can't bring you to the warehouse, kids. I'll be back." He gave Marcus an uncertain glance. "Any chance you could check on them midday?" "They're not used to me being gone so long." Marcus nodded without hesitation. "I'll swing by." Bill exhaled relief, patting the older dog again. With that, Bill stepped outside, the door's lock clicking behind him. A new day, a new routine. Marcus lingered briefly, not wanting to overstay or infringe on Bill's sense of independence. He rubbed the older dog's ears, murmuring how proud he was of Bill's progress. Then he departed, promising the dogs he'd return around lunchtime. Driving away, he felt a tug of conflicting emotions, gratitude that Bill could stand on his own, and a pang that he was no longer needed daily. But that was the point, wasn't it? To restore Bill's dignity, to let the dogs live with their rightful caretaker. Midday arrived in a flash of phone calls and emails, true to his word. Marcus drove back to the studio, a quick doggy welfare check. Unlocking the door with the spare key Bill had given him, he found both dogs dozing peacefully, tails thumping at his entrance. The younger pup bounded up with a little bark of greeting, while the older dog ambled over with a wag. Leaning into Marcus, he replenished their water, set out a few treats, and spent 10 minutes tossing a squeaky toy around, letting the pup burn off energy. The older dog ambled behind, trying to keep up. In that small, unremarkable space, Marcus felt an odd bliss, a sense of closeness to these animals who'd shaped his perspective on compassion. Just as he prepared to leave, a gentle knock sounded at the door. Startled, he opened it to find Miss Daniels standing there, smiling. "Figured I'd drop by, see how they're doing. Bill told me you might be here." She glanced at the dogs, relaxing at the sight of them looking healthy and calm. Together, they shared a moment of reflection, how only weeks ago these dogs and Bill languished on grim sidewalks. Now a stable job, a modest apartment, and a reconnection with the dog's former owner had spun their fortunes around. "Ms." Daniels patted the older dog, marveling at the scar. "It's amazing he was yours years ago," she said softly. Marcus nodded, recalling how improbable fate sometimes proved. That evening, Bill came home, sweaty from labor, but smiling at the dogs bouncing around him. Marcus, finishing a short dinner visit, caught Bill's expression, a weary joy that spoke volumes. The older dog sniffed Bill's work clothes, as though approving his honest efforts. The younger pup yipped in delight, circling them both. Bill set down his backpack, rummaging out a small can of dog treats he bought with his own money. It was a tiny gesture of self-sufficiency, but it resonated with Marcus. Bill was already taking ownership of his responsibilities, forging forward without leaning on charity. As night fell, Marcus prepared to depart. Bill walked him to the door, dogs trailing close. Pausing, Bill cleared his throat. "I just wanted to say, well, you gave me more than a roof. You gave me hope, and you gave these dogs a future." He scratched behind the older dog's ear. "Especially him. He never stopped missing you, I think." Marcus glanced away, throat tight. He patted the older dog's head, brushing a hand over the pup's wagging tail. "He saved me, too," he murmured. "Reminded me that we can't just walk away from what matters." They exchanged a brief hug, an unspoken pact that though Bill had his own life now, their bond wouldn't vanish. Marcus stepped into the hallway, hearing the dogs whine softly behind the closing door. The emptiness tugged at him again, but in a different way. This time it carried a sense of fulfillment. He had done what needed doing, bridging the gulf between privilege and desperation, all because a stray dog refused to let him forget their past connection. Driving home, city lights flickered off the windshield. Memories of the older dog bounding across manicured lawns replayed in Marcus's mind, merging with images of the dog limping beside Bill in a grimy alley. That unbreakable loyalty transcended wealth, time, even heartbreak. It made him wonder if his business success paled next to the quiet victory of saving a man and two dogs who had no one else to champion them. The older dog's scarred ear symbolized not just lost years, but redemption and fresh starts. In the hush of his condo, Marcus acknowledged an unspoken vow. If Bill or the dogs ever needed him, he'd be there, because in choosing to save them, they'd all found a piece of their own salvation. Time slipped into a steady routine for the next few weeks, with Bill going to the warehouse each morning and returning to his modest studio in the evenings. Marcus, finding respite from his usual corporate grind, popped by every few days to check on them. The older dog greeted him each time with calm recognition, tail wagging in a slow, steady rhythm, an echo of past bonds. The younger pup, bursting with energy, would yip excitedly, racing around the small space. Bill's progress at work showed promise. Fred mentioned the possibility of offering him a longer-term contract if he maintained punctuality and efficiency. As Bill settled into stable living, the tension between him and Marcus's penthouse life gradually eased. However, a new undercurrent of stress brewed. Certain condo board members whispered that Marcus had brought a homeless man and dogs into the building, risking property values and security. Although Bill and the dogs no longer stayed in the penthouse, rumors clung to Marcus's reputation like stubborn cobwebs. Neighbors speculated about why he'd done so, some voicing quiet admiration, others casting doubt on his judgment. Marcus tried to shrug off the gossip, focusing on the success story unfolding with Bill. Yet he couldn't ignore the mounting pressure from the Condo Association to address reputational concerns. A letter arrived from the board's legal counsel, subtly hinting that if negative publicity arose or if any further rule breaches were discovered, Marcus's membership in the exclusive building could be reviewed. The threat hovered like a storm cloud, contradictory to everything Marcus had come to believe in after reuniting with his lost dog. The older dog had taught him compassion that transcended status. Now, ironically, that same compassion threatened to dent his polished social standing. Part of him bristled. He was wealthy enough to buy a house anywhere else. Why cling to a building that disdained the very empathy that reawakened his sense of purpose? Even so, pride and practicality kept him from storming out on the pricey condo. He had business ties, a well-established routine there. Could he quell the board's unease? He considered writing a formal apology, clarifying Bill's stay was temporary, but Bill was already gone from the penthouse. Still, apparently, the memory of a homeless man and two dogs overshadowed the usual etiquette. The entire fiasco underscored how easily generosity could rattle the well-heeled. Unaware of this new tension, Bill carried on. The dogs thrived in his care, no longer rummaging through trash for scraps. The younger pup grew stronger, bounding around the studio like an excited child. The older dog, once lost to hardship, seemed content to lounge on a worn blanket or follow Bill on small walks around the block. Yet even Bill sensed something off about Marcus's subdued mood whenever he visited. Late one evening, as the dogs dozed at Bill's feet, Bill asked quietly, "Is something wrong? You seem stressed." Marcus hesitated, then admitted the condo board's disapproval. Bill's face darkened with guilt. "I never meant to cause trouble for you," he whispered, voice low. "If you need me to keep distance, I understand." Marcus shook his head, a surge of protective frustration rising. "You didn't do anything wrong. They just can't handle people stepping outside their polished bubbles." The older dog, sensing tension, rose and placed its muzzle on Marcus's knee, a silent comfort. The gesture reaffirmed Marcus's commitment. "I'd do it all again," he said softly, patting the dog's head. Bill managed a wavering smile, though worry lingered. "I only wish you didn't pay a price for helping us." A few nights later, the tension reached a peak. Marcus received word that a major investor from his corporation had heard rumors about him harboring vagabonds and strays, purportedly damaging the brand's prestige among certain elite clients. The investor requested a discreet meeting to clear the air. Marcus grimly anticipated a lecture about how charity was fine if done in sanctioned, glossy philanthropic events, but not in raw, unfiltered ways that might jar stakeholders. A part of him seethed. Was compassion only acceptable if it wore a tuxedo at a gala? The meeting proved as infuriating as he feared. The investor cloaked their concern in polite phrases. "We admire your goodwill, but must safeguard the company's image." They urged him to distance himself from sensational stories, like a wealthy mogul housing a homeless man. The older dog saga was heartwarming, but potentially scandalous in the eyes of certain conservative partners. Marcus's jaw tightened. He refused to disclaim Bill or pretend the dogs never existed. Instead, he calmly explained the outcome was a success story, not a liability. The investor left unconvinced, warning that if negative press surfaced, the board might lose confidence in Marcus's leadership. Stepping out of that stifling conference room, Marcus wrestled with the conflict at the heart of his life: corporate loyalty or moral integrity. He recalled the older dog limping beside Bill, how they turned to him in unwavering trust. Could he truly betray that trust because of shallow public perception? He decided no, bracing for any backlash. If the condo board or corporate investors couldn't stomach genuine compassion, so be it. "I won't abandon Bill and the dogs," he resolved. Meanwhile, Bill, sensing Marcus's turmoil, offered to fade from public view if it helped. He even suggested relocating to a further part of the city, but Marcus refused. "You have a stable job here now, and the dogs are safe. No one's forcing you to uproot again." The older dog perched at Bill's feet, tail drooping at the mention of leaving. The younger pup tilted her head, oblivious to adult anxieties. Marcus gently petted both dogs, reaffirming that they'd made it this far by defying assumptions. Why stop now? One final blow threatened the delicate peace. Ms. Greenwood from the condo board emailed Marcus, announcing a formal hearing about indecorous behavior and potential policy violations. He had a week to prepare his defense. The dog no longer lived with him, but evidence of Bill's temporary stay lingered in building records. The question loomed: would they attempt to revoke Marcus's penthouse privileges or impose huge fines as an example? Marcus, surprisingly calm, told Bill he'd handle it. If worst came to worst, he could move elsewhere. Bill, wide-eyed, stammered apologies that the older dog's presence triggered so much upheaval. Marcus simply smiled, voice steady. "That dog once belonged to me, and you belong with him. I won't let prejudice or bureaucracies tear apart what we've built." In the hush of Bill's studio, the older dog lifted its head, as if understanding the vow. Marcus kneeled, hugging the dog gently, feeling a surge of defiance. Regardless of corporate image or condo politics, he'd stand by them. Perhaps the final tension would erupt in a board hearing or a scandal, but loyalty, he realized, wasn't something to hide. It was the bond that had saved them all. And in that unwavering conviction, he found the strength to face whatever the next day's challenges would bring. On a drizzly Wednesday, the condo board convened an extraordinary meeting to address Mr. Turner's alleged policy violations, as stated in the formal notice. Tension crackled in the building's private meeting room, a high-ceilinged space with polished marble floors, where residents typically discussed mundane matters like hallway carpeting. But today, an unusual number of onlookers attended, curious neighbors, a few staff members, and even Mrs. Daniels, who had come to support Marcus. At the front, Miss Greenwood presided with a somber expression. Marcus took a seat in the front row, arms folded, preparing to defend himself. Although Bill and the dogs no longer resided in his penthouse, the condo's bylaws had strict rules about unapproved guests and pets. Word had spread that Marcus sheltered a homeless man and 2 strays for nearly 2 weeks. The board sought to determine if he'd brought the building into disrepute. As he scanned the room, he noted Ms. Greenwood's cool gaze, the property manager's uneasy stance, and the hush of anticipation from the small crowd. He inhaled, steeling himself for what could become a very public condemnation of his choices. Mr. Greenwood called the meeting to order. She read out the official complaint, that Marcus allegedly broke guest policies by housing someone without a formal lease or background check and allowed unregistered dogs in the penthouse. She paused, letting the gravity settle. Then she looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Turner, would you care to explain your rationale?" Her tone was measured, but a hint of disapproval lurked beneath. Rising, Marcus cleared his throat, hands clasped to contain his nerves. "Yes, thank you," he began. "I did shelter a homeless man, Bill, in my apartment for about 2 weeks. He came with 2 dogs, one of which I recognized from my past. At first, it was an urgent matter of compassion. They had nowhere else to go, and I couldn't turn them away." He spoke calmly, meeting Ms. Greenwood's eyes. "I understand this violates certain building policies, but let me emphasize, it was temporary, a humanitarian response. Bill has since found stable housing, works a warehouse job, and the dogs now reside with him in a proper rental." Ms. Greenwood listened, expression unreadable. The property manager offered notes about the building bylaws. "This building prides itself on high standards and exclusivity," he said, voice tight. "We can't open our doors to anyone who lacks credentials, or we risk security incidents. Another concern is that the dog barking disturbed neighbors, even if it was short-term, as it set a precedent." A few neighbors in the audience murmured, some nodding in agreement. Others remained silent, less certain. Marcus inhaled, bracing for the next step. Miss Greenwood asked pointedly if he realized the potential image risk for the building. "We heard rumors, Mr. Turner, that certain high-profile residents felt uneasy about your guest's background. Some might consider moving." She paused for effect. "We rely on stability here. If owners lose confidence in our standards, it impacts property values." Marcus's frustration flared. He responded evenly. "I understand property values matter, but do they outweigh human decency?" Bill was literally on the street. He had no safe option that allowed his dogs. "Our rules can't be so rigid we ignore compassion altogether, can they?" A hush fell, the question echoing in the quiet room. Mrs. Greenwood pursed her lips again, the crowd shifting in their seats. Suddenly, Miss Daniels rose from the back row. Though not a resident, she requested to speak. The board hesitated, then allowed it. She introduced herself as a social worker who'd helped Bill. "I can confirm that Bill secured a legitimate job and an apartment thanks to Mr. Turner's intervention," she explained. "Without those 2 weeks of shelter, Bill likely would have lost the dogs, possibly even his chance at employment." She glanced around the room. "Sometimes, exceptions save lives. There was no security threat. The dogs caused minimal disruption. This was an act of humanity." A ripple of thoughtful murmurs passed through the audience. Miss Greenwood looked uneasy. The property manager flipped through documents, unable to refute Miss Daniels' testimony. Marcus felt a small surge of relief, hoping reason would prevail. But Mrs. Greenwood, clinging to protocol, insisted they must enforce rules or risk chaos. "We're not heartless," she said, "but we can't let owners flaunt regulations, or everyone will claim special circumstances." A few heads nodded, echoing her stance. A new voice rose, an older neighbor who'd once complained about barking. Surprising everyone, she spoke in Marcus's defense. "I did hear the pup bark, but it was minor, and I respect Mr. Turner for helping. If that's our biggest problem here, maybe we should reflect on what kind of community we want. She shrugged. I'd rather see compassion than strict rule enforcement. Her words sparked muted applause from some attendees. Ms. Greenwood's composure slipped a fraction, clearly not expecting a split of opinion. Sensing an opening, Marcus laid out his final argument. He admitted breaking the bylaws, but noted that Bill was gone now. The dogs registered under Bill's new address, and no further disruptions had occurred. All that remains, he said, is whether you punish me for an act of mercy. If so, I'll abide by your decision. But perhaps we can revise policies for future emergencies, ensuring we don't turn away decent people who just need a lifeline. Murmurs rippled. Miss Greenwood fidgeted with her pen, exchanging a glance with the property manager. The board withdrew to a corner for a brief deliberation. Tension soared. The audience hushed in anticipation. Marcus gazed at Mrs. Daniels, who offered a supportive nod. He braced for anything: fines, eviction, censure. Finally, Miss Greenwood returned to the front. In a measured tone, she announced the board's decision. They recognized the unique context would not penalize Marcus heavily, but would levy a moderate fine for unauthorized occupancy. Additionally, they'd draft an addendum to allow short-term humanitarian stays under strict oversight. A flurry of sighs and murmurs coursed through the crowd. Marcus exhaled relief. No forced eviction, no massive scandal, just a smaller financial slap on the wrist. As the meeting ended, Ms. Greenwood approached Marcus, giving a tired half-smile. "You broke rules," she said softly, "but you reminded us that sometimes empathy matters more. I hope it doesn't cause further rifts." Marcus nodded, thanking her for the balanced outcome. Ms. Daniels flashed him a grin, whispering, "You did good." The older neighbor who spoke earlier gave him a thumbs up, evidently pleased. Outside, a light drizzle misted the pavement. Marcus paused under the building's awning, closing his eyes, tension draining from his shoulders. So the condo fiasco resolved with minimal damage. He looked at Mrs. Daniels. "Thank you for speaking up." She patted his arm, remarking that he'd inspired at least a few residents to see beyond rules. "What about Bill and the dogs?" she asked. "You still plan to keep in contact?" Marcus's chest warmed. "Absolutely, they're family now, in a sense." He headed to his car, heart brimming with quiet triumph. Through an improbable chain of events triggered by a lost dog's loyalty, a homeless man regained his footing. 2 strays found a safe home, and even a rigid condo board faced compassion. Driving across the city, Marcus dialed Bill's number. Bill answered, background noise of the warehouse echoing. "How'd it go?" Bill asked anxiously. Marcus relayed the board's ruling, reassuring him everything was fine. Bill sighed relief, promising a celebratory dinner for all once he finished this shift. Hanging up, Marcus pictured the older dog's gentle gaze, the younger pup's playful yips, both safe in Bill's new place. He smiled, truly content. Losing the dog once shattered a piece of his spirit, but fate and a stubborn stray led him to redeem that loss by saving not just the dog, but an entire man's future. And if that sense of redemption came with a small fine or raised eyebrows, it was a trivial price. In the hush of the twilight commute, Marcus drove on, recalling how one humble beggar with 2 ragged dogs had unlocked a heart and bridged 2 worlds. And in the quiet hum of the engine, he vowed never again to turn a blind eye to such cries for help, because sometimes the most shocking acts of kindness begin with a single spark of... As the dust settled on the condo board drama, a sense of calm enveloped Marcus's life, one that felt richer than any business victory. He had weathered the building's scrutiny, held to a modest fine, and now stood free to continue helping Bill and the 2 dogs without fear of imminent eviction. Though he still felt a flicker of annoyance each time he recalled the stuffy board meeting, the relief of seeing Bill safely housed, employed, and bonded with the dogs far outweighed the price. In quiet moments, Marcus reflected on how the stray dog he once lost had led him to an act of empathy that changed more than just one life. A week later, under a crisp blue sky, Marcus stood outside Bill's modest studio, arms full of groceries for a small gathering. Today marked Bill's 1-month anniversary on the job. Fred at the warehouse described him as consistent, never late, and always polite. So Bill felt proud enough to invite a few guests over for dinner, limited though his space might be. Ms. Daniels came carrying a simple dessert. Martin from the volunteer outreach brought paper plates, and even Yvonne the foster volunteer arrived with the little pup's favorite squeaky toy. For Bill, such a gathering was unthinkable mere weeks ago. Now, it felt like a new normal. Inside, the older dog greeted Marcus with a slow wag, pressing its scarred ear to his leg. The younger pup scampered around Mrs. Daniels, sniffing the dessert box. Bill, wearing a clean t-shirt and jeans, ushered them in with a wide grin. Come in, he said, still sounding amazed to be hosting. A small second-hand table sat in the corner, a mismatched set of chairs waiting for them. The dogs circled, tails wagging at all the friendly faces. As they settled down, Bill placed the groceries on a rickety counter, explaining that he'd learned a few simple recipes from fellow warehouse workers. Marcus, remembering Bill's first tentative days in the penthouse, felt a wave of pride. The man who once huddled in cold alleys now navigated an everyday routine, cooking, paying rent with an assist for now, and caring for both canines. That transformation was as profound as any corporate merger or financial coup Marcus had orchestrated. They shared a basic meal of pasta and vegetables with chicken scraps for the dogs. Laughter and conversation swirled in the cramped studio. Miss Daniels recounted the Condo board hearing with a wry chuckle, praising Marcus for standing his ground. Martin told stories of other successful rehousings he'd witnessed in the city, remarking how Bill's case felt especially heartwarming because of the dog's role. Yvonne teased Bill about naming the younger pup Spark, after seeing her bound around in endless energy. Bill chuckled, nodding that Spark and the older dog, whom he'd decided to rename Lucky in homage to surviving so much, gave him constant motivation. Marcus listened quietly, letting the warmth of shared triumph wash over him. He noticed how the older dog occasionally approached, resting its muzzle on his knee as if to say thank you once more. Each time it did, Marcus felt a surge of emotion, recalling how this dog once disappeared from his life, leaving behind regret he never fully confronted. Now seeing Lucky, the dog's new name, thriving in Bill's care, tail high, reminded him that second chances were real, and that healing old wounds sometimes involved helping others find their own redemption. When dinner ended, the group shared a casual toast to Bill's ongoing success. Mr. Daniels snapped a photo, Bill beaming in the middle, the two dogs at his feet, Marcus and the others flanking him. The small space brimmed with a unity that transcended class or background. Later, as the night deepened, each guest prepared to leave. Marcus lingered last in helping Bill tidy. The older dog dozed contentedly, while Spark gnawed on a squeaky toy with gusto. Well, Marcus said softly, finishing a stack of rinsed plates. It seems you're truly settled, Bill. Bill nodded, eyes earnest. I still have a long way to go, full-time hours, saving for real furniture, and eventually letting these dogs roam a yard if I can move to a bigger place. But yeah, thanks to you, the dogs, everyone. Life's turning around. He set the plates on the drying rack, then looked at Lucky dozing in a patch of moonlight. Funny to think how I had nothing except these dogs. Then your dog, Lucky, found you, and all this happened. Marcus exhaled, crossing the small kitchen to kneel beside Lucky. Gently, he stroked the scar that once symbolized a lost era. He was yours too, he whispered to Bill, gazing at the dog's soft breathing. And maybe, in a way, he belonged to both of us, leading us to do what was needed. Bill rested a hand on Marcus's shoulder, voice hushed. We owe him everything. From a fancy estate to a city alley, then to my underpass when he never gave up on humans, did he? They exchanged a meaningful glance, both marveling at the dog's resilience. Spark suddenly bounded over, squeaking her toy, snapping them out of the reverie. Bill laughed, standing up. Marcus rose, dusting off his knees. All right, I should head back, he said. Work calls tomorrow morning. Bill followed him to the door, the dogs trailing. Marcus paused, feeling the significance of this goodbye, a normal, everyday farewell that once felt impossible for Bill to experience. If you need anything, call me, he offered. Bill nodded, a grateful shine in his eyes. I will. And you, stop by any time. Lucky and Spark love a visit. With that, Marcus stepped into the corridor. The door closed behind him. No dramatics, no tension, just the simple closure of a day rooted in hope. In the cool night air outside, Marcus let a gentle smile spread across his face. This wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was one that felt more genuine than any other path. A stray dog's unwavering spirit had bridged his wealth with another man's poverty, forging a shared future for two dogs and a friend he never dreamed he'd have. If that was shocking to society or the Condo board, so be it. Compassion had emerged victorious. If this story of an unlikely connection between a millionaire, a homeless man, and two determined dogs touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. We share true-life narratives where simple acts of empathy transcend boundaries. Like and share this video to help others see that even life's starkest contrasts can be bridged by kindness. And leave a comment below telling us about a moment when someone's loyalty, animal or human, shaped your life in a profound way. Together, let's remind the world that no status or setback can overshadow compassion, and that sometimes the most shocking outcomes emerge from a single spark of recognition and trust.